And now I've replaced all these 4 nodes with the same node, just with the special block pin exposed now. And spawn new quad needs to take in the special array. We'll do the same thing we were doing here with the colors array. Make a local array of booleans, special array. Set its value here. And then do the same thing here, just get special array indices 0 through 3 and plug them in here. So I'll need to space out these. And now where we call this function, we need to make sure we're actually attaching this. And now, hopefully, if we've set up the blocks, we should still need to go and set up the actual mesh on the blocks. We didn't do that yet, so I have the gem mesh, but it's no longer needs to be a skeletal mesh. So I'll go ahead and remove that and add static mesh component, child it to the block mesh, call it gem mesh. And we've crashed the Unreal Editor. So when I tried to rename that static mesh that I just added to the block mesh, it actually crashed my editor. So I guess I'll try that again. The skeletal mesh is still there. I'll delete that, or first I'll rename it to old gem, just because maybe giving a new mesh the same name is what caused the crash. So I'll delete that, compile, remove all references to, well, don't need this morph target thing anymore. And I'm going to make a new static mesh, child it to the block mesh. Call it gem mesh. Didn't crash that time. Add the beveled cube. Put it at the proper location, 37.5 in the Y. Scale it to 0.2. There it is, looking okay. Might be, yeah, it looks to be in the right place. So now we just need to turn it visible if special block boolean is true. So now let's see if it works. They all are default true, I guess. Oops, let's see. I didn't set this to be initially hidden. So now let's see if it works. Okay, so the gem shows up in the proper place in the player quad, so that's good. But I noticed that you can spawn, the first time you spawn in, there's a chance to have a special block. Maybe that's fine, but it doesn't coincide with our plan to not include it in the preview quads. So let's go to where we're making the very first player quad, right here. And let's detach this too, so the player can't get a special block on their first ever player quad. I guess we need it here, so I'll make an array that's all zeros. And I'll say right here as a comment, don't allow player to get a special block in their first quad. And I'll say the same thing here for the special array. Don't allow player to get special blocks in initial preview quads. Just as a gameplay thing, I don't think those should be in the first few blocks. And you'll notice that the special blocks don't follow along where they should when the player tries to rotate their quad. So I have the special block in the bottom left corner of my quad, but when I rotate, it stays in the bottom left instead of moving along with the block that it started in. So to fix that, we just need to add some logic to the rotations to carry over the special block. And then we'll need a function on the blocks that the player controls to make the gem mesh hidden or visible. So instead of calling this function initialize gem mesh, I'm going to call it update gem mesh. So what that means is this will be set to true or false. After a rotation, this value could have changed. So after every rotation, we need to show or hide the gem based on whether we have the gem now or not. So hopefully that's clear why I'm trying to do that. Because we're about to change the way the rotations work. And we're going to need to call this function on every block in our quad after we do the rotation. So in the player controller now, we need to go to both rotation functions, and just as we're passing the color from one block to the next, we also need to pass the special boolean. So all that's going to involve is doubling the logic here, like adding the same logic again but with a different boolean. So here, get the same quad, and get is special block, and set a new local variable called old special bottom left. Set that here so that we'll preserve that, so we can use it to update our last block here in the line. So quad BR, we need to, all I'm going to do is copy this logic. So, here we're setting quad BL's color 1 boolean. So we're also going to be setting quad BL's is special block boolean based on quad BR's is special block boolean value. I'll demonstrate for this first quad block, and then I'll just skip to the end for the other blocks. So here we'll set is special block for quad BL based on the value of this variable for quad BR. I'll need to space these out a little bit more, I think. once you have it for one of them, you can copy it and just paste this layout down to the next one. And then just drag these to connect them. Save a bit of time that way. But for this last one, we're not going to get a value from another block. We're going to just use old special BL. So after we set color by Boolean here, we also need to update gem mesh on each block in the quad so that our color and special status get updated appropriately. And now let's test the clockwise rotations. You can see our gem moves along with the colors. That's what we want to have happen. So now we just need to repeat that for the counterclockwise function. Okay, now the counterclockwise function has been updated as well to update the values of SpecialBlock on each rotated block. So now we need to call update gem mesh on each block again. And now the gems should rotate properly, as if they really belong to the block they spawned on. Now a visual thing that needs to be affected is the gems themselves don't appear and disappear with the material on them like the dissolve material that the other blocks do have. We'll go ahead and add a gem mesh dissolve material so that the gems dissolve just like the blocks do, so that everything stays nice and visually consistent. I've switched back to my old microphone because I'm concerned that the new one does not have the proper setup for this room. I need to get a microphone stand so I can get it right next to my mouth. So I'm going to go back to this old headset. Hopefully it's not too jarring of a change. So we need to make a dissolve version of the gem material, and we also need to make a highlighted version so that when the gem belongs to a block that it gets matched, the gem also like lights up or grows or does something that might look a little bit out of place to remain totally static inside of the changing block. So let's go ahead and turn this into a parent object, and we'll make at least 2 child material instances. So we're going to have a matched version where it's more emissive and highlighted. And then when it actually gets highlighted by the timer bar, well, actually, let's see what happens right now with the gems inside of the blocks when the blocks turn into the metallic highlighted versions. I'm curious to see what that looks like. They just get hidden by the larger mesh outside of them, so that's fine. No need to worry about what it looks like when it's highlighted then. We'll just do the matched version, and we're just going to use the emissive strength value and crank that up a little bit. We'll need to make an unmatched version too, so that it has something to interpolate between. And I'm going to remove the word matte from these just so that they're a little shorter. I know my naming scheme has been a bit inconsistent between the various materials. On the dissolved materials, there's no underscores, so I mean, it's a bit inconsistent, but hopefully it's not too confusing. So this one's just going to be the default values. And then we need a dissolved material too. So I made these as material instances of these bases. And I think I just copied these bases originally from these materials. Instead of copying from this base material, I'm going to copy one of these and then just change the color so that I have all the dissolve logic already in there. So duplicate this, I'll call it SpecialBlock dissolve base. And I just need to change the color to the same color that I have over here. So just gonna copy from this parameter and then paste it into this parameter. And the fringe color can be just a similar color, perhaps a little darker or lighter. And now we just need to apply these materials to the gem meshes and make them animate just as the block materials animate. So let's go to the beveled cube, have its default material be, it doesn't really matter if we make the default material the unmatched or the dissolve base, because whichever one we choose as the default, we'll have to overwrite this in one of the two blueprints, either the preview quad blueprint or the block blueprint, so just pick one of these, doesn't really matter which. And we're going to go to the preview quads first, I suppose. Doesn't really matter which, but we're going to modify these to use the dissolve material. So, oh, I didn't actually make the dissolve. I need to actually make the dissolve instance so that I can change the parameter at runtime. So create an instance of this and just call it dissolve inst so that we can modify the dissolve amount while the game is running. So now let's go back to the preview quad. I'm going to delete this because I don't need it. And all these gems need to use the dissolve inst material. And when the preview quad begins dissolving, we need to do this on the dynamic material that's applied to all of these gems. So in fact, we know the gems are all going to be the same color, so we don't have to do this for 4 different dynamic materials. We can just do one dynamic material called gem dynamic material. And when we create these dynamic materials, before we do that, or after, I guess we can do it after, on a new pin, we will create a dynamic material. Material instance dynamic object. We're going to set this to create dynamic material instance of the type dissolve inst. So it doesn't matter what the default is on these because we're going to override it immediately. then we're going to set the material on all 4 of these gems to this dynamic material. We could just set it on the ones that are visible, but it doesn't really matter if we set it on all 4 of them. So this is going to look probably more confusing than it is. I'm just going to do all 4 of these materials in a row, all coming from the same pin here. And I can use reroute nodes to prevent all this overlap from occurring. But even with the reroute nodes, it's going to look more confusing than it is. So yeah, all I'm doing is applying this same dynamic material to all 4 of these gem meshes, so that when I update the dynamic material, any 4 of these will do its dissolve during the dissolve animation. So now in the event graph, when we do that dissolve here, we do the timeline and update the dissolve percentage, which makes these disappear over time. We just need to do the same thing with the gem dynamic material now. And we can go ahead and see if that works. It should already be working. Oh, right now we're not even seeing the gems in the preview quads anymore, so I messed up something in the material. This box wasn't checked, which means it wasn't able to overwrite the default, so there was just some sort of issue. Let's see if that fixed it. It doesn't seem to be dissolving. In the process of trying to figure out what's going on with this material, I realized I was making a mistake in the spawning in of the preview quads in the game mode. So when the game mode decides which special block should be chosen, this integer value should be 4, not 3. If it's only 3, then whatever was at index 3 of the special array was never going to be true, because this would only return values between 0 and 2. Right, if this was 3, then it's between 0 and 3 minus 1, which is 2, so it's only... the final index was never being picked, so now that's fixed. So the gems should appear in any of the 4 with equal probability. And here's the obvious problem, was I just didn't have this wired up, so this should fix it. Hopefully. It's just gone 1 frame. It's there 1 frame, gone the next. So that's interesting. It doesn't look like there's any gradual dissolving of this happening. It's becoming highlighted for a frame before it disappears. 0.487571 705. So somewhere in here it's just getting instantaneously turning white. Okay, I believe I have resolved the issue of the gem mesh not dissolving properly, and that was due to a problem with the import. When I created the original beveled cube, I didn't give it any UV maps, so like if you go to the UVs here, it's just a blank. There's nothing, so there's no data here. So what I had to do was just reopen my model in Blender, and I don't know much about UV maps, but there's a tool that Blender has. If you highlight all the faces of your mesh, like in edit mode, and press the U key, then there's UV mapping options, and I just used Smart UV Project, which I suppose automatically unwraps your mesh, and I just selected this and used the default options here and just pressed OK. And then I re-exported my model after that, and that's why I have a V2 here, and this one has UV maps that work. So now it's not perfect because the geometry is not very good on this model. Like if you just look at it, it's not probably a good idea to have such weird uneven geometry where we've got weird shaped quads and really long quads and a really big face. Like it's just not a very good model, but it's good enough for my purposes, I think. And it looks better now when I dissolve. It doesn't look great, but it actually dissolves properly. So there's weird, edges because the model itself is just not very good, and I used an automatic tool, but it at least the front face, which is most of what we're going to be seeing, is going to dissolve like this now, so that's certainly good enough now. So now I need to just change these. I'm just going to save everything, change all of these meshes to be the V2 version of my cube. And then the material should still work properly. So now that should be all I needed to do to make the gems dissolve properly out of the preview quads. And I still need to change the mesh on the... Oh, well, now they're still not working. So I need to set the... Oh, I have this number saved wrong. This needs to be... Obviously not that. It needs to be 0. Okay. Or whatever the default was, but it actually needs to be 0. And that should be good now. So now we should hopefully see the gems dissolve properly, or better than before. Ideally it should be relatively unnoticeable. That's the point, is to have it not stick out. So when these dissolve, they should dissolve basically like the blocks surrounding them do. And it's going to be slightly delayed here. It's happening on the side that we can't see, and then it's going to happen eventually on the front. So yeah, that's pretty okay, I think. So now we just need to change them on the blocks so that they have the right material and the right cube. So gem mesh, change this to beveled cube v2. So in the construction script of the block, I'll go ahead and add some logic here, which I might turn into a function. We're just going to make a new gem material dynamic. So again, we need to use the dissolve instance on the gem so that it will fade in along with the block. So we set the material on the gem to this. And then when we start here, we dissolve in. So we just do the same thing on the gem. And then here, when we've completed our dissolve, we just switch our two blocks. Because if you recall, for the block mesh here, we needed a dissolve mesh that has the dynamic material on it. And then we switched to a different mesh for the highlighting, the unmatched and matched versions, because sometimes blocks would be highlighted and sometimes they wouldn't. So sometimes the material would switch over and sometimes it wouldn't, so we just used two separate meshes. So I think we'll just go ahead and do the same thing. So just to preempt any potential issues, I'm going to duplicate this and just call it dissolve gem mesh. So this is the mesh that's going to fade in, and then as soon as it's done fading in, this one will be there. If we're a special block. So a bit of refactoring here, a bit of changing things around. We don't want to call update gem mesh here in the construction script. we still want to call this when we are rotating, but not here. And instead we're going to set this material no matter what on this gem in case we need to fade in. We can choose to use a Boolean check here to only do this if we are a special block, but we're going to need a Boolean check here in the begin play function too, so that we only update the dissolve amount on our gem if we are a special block. So we can just have the check here. Say if we're a special block, then also update our dissolve on the block, on the gem rather. So if we are a special block, update our scalar parameter on the gem as well as the block. Otherwise, don't do that because we don't have a gem visible right now. And now when the dissolve is complete, we're going to hide the dissolve gem mesh. And then, or if we are a special block, if we're not, it's already hidden. So if we're a special block, then hide our dissolve gem mesh, and also show our normal gem mesh. That way our normal gem mesh will be ready for its highlighting, which we still have to script right now. So when we transition from unmatched to matched, or back from matched to unmatched, that may never happen in the case where we're a special block, because being a special block guarantees that we are cleared, because you're always going to clear at least yourself as a special block. So this can never really happen, or sorry, no, this can never really happen when we are a special block, because just having the gem guarantees we're going to clear ourselves, so no situation will unmatch us. So we don't really have to worry about transitioning the gem from matched to unmatched. But from unmatched to matched we do have to do, because after it's finished, after the block is finished fading in, we're going to be moving around in the player quad before we land somewhere. So we're going to be initially unmatched. But every gem is guaranteed to become matched when it lands. So along with interpolating the color and size of the block, we need to set the color of the gem using this same logic here, but with different materials. So we're going to need to make more variables again for the gem. This is our dissolve gem material. So dissolve gem matte dynamic. And then we have normal gem matte dynamic. And this is the one that's going to change the highlighted amount. And then we need our two non-dynamic material instances for the target and starting for the gem. So we need gem target matte inst and gem starting matte inst. And these are not dynamic, but normal material instance. So make sure to set both of these to normal material instances. So I'll just stretch this out. And we also don't need to worry about match to highlighted for the gem, because the gem gets hidden by the skeletal mesh when that appears. So all we need to do is duplicate a lot of this logic for the gem. So here when we set this up, we set it up in set color by Boolean. So we can just set this to a default value, the gem matte dynamic. We can go ahead and do it here when we do the dissolve gem matte dynamic. We're doing the dissolve instance, but we can also do our unmatched inst for the gem here as well. So I'll go ahead and break this up into a new function called initialize gem meshes. So it initializes not only the dissolve gem mesh here, but the normal gem mesh. So now we create another dynamic material instance. I'll go ahead and do this in a sequence just so that it's clear that it's two equal but different events happening here. And this is going to be the unmatched gem color. As our starting point for the gems dynamic material. And then we do the same thing here and set it on the gem. So now in the event when we go from unmatched to matched, we start at gem matte dynamic, and our target is always going to be, our starting and target are always going to be the same thing because we're only doing one transition ever on the gem. Going from this unmatched to matched, we're never going to go back and forth, we're never going to change based on color, so we don't need to worry about setting these to different things at runtime. We can set them by default. The target one is always going to be matched inst. And here we're setting the starting, even though it's always going to be the same thing. So here we just need to set the target to our new one here, starting, and make sure we set this on the gem. And that should do it, but I may be forgetting something. Let's see what happens. I may have left something uninitialized, so there may be some problems. Let's see if we got our... Yeah, it didn't seem to transition in properly. But let's see what happens if it gets matched. It's hard to tell if it's being emissive right now. Looks like it might be, but hard to say. I'll inspect another one as it gets highlighted. So if we look up real close at this gem material here. Yeah, as you can see here, it is getting brighter as the match is occurring. It's very subtle, but we can make it less subtle by changing the material. So we can make it more emissive, or maybe make it somehow shinier, or just changing the color to be more blue or green. So now it's more visually distinct from the unmatched. We'll see if that's more noticeable now. It just kind of gets eaten up by the brightness of the other color. So maybe we'll do something crazy and make it like purple. A very bright but still colorful purple, except it's not still not visible. Yeah, the white color just totally destroys the purple. You can't even see it when you get back far enough. I can try blowing it out with a crazy emissiveness, but don't want to be overly distracting. But let's see what it looks like now. It's just still kind of gets destroyed by the larger blocks lighting up around it, but it's maybe more noticeable now. I might try making them green again, not purple, but we'll see. See what that looks like. So it gets very bright. It's still going to be like too white, so it really kind of fades in with the white blocks, but let's see how it looks against the orange blocks too. More noticeable maybe. I think part of the problem is that's just the whiteness of the source light as part of the emissive material makes it there's no like central gem that's lighting up. I mean there is, but it's harder to see it because it's inside the block, and it's just so white at the source that you don't really see the green light. You just see the white light at the center, which blends in with the white blocks around it. So I've been messing around with color grading in the post-processing volume to try and see if that can alleviate some of the issues. The issue is that the whites of the matched white silver blocks are so bright that they overpower the brightness of the gem, and we want the player to be able to tell where the gem is placed so they can see where the matches are going to be made, but it just gets kind of blown out. But so what I've done here, which threatens to be overpowering, is changed how the highlight brightness looks, so it almost gets overbearingly shiny when it first lands and flashes. So that might be distracting, but it's also kind of a cool effect, I think, to really show like you placed a powerful block down and it really has an effect on screen. You can see it like flash like that when it lands, or when it first becomes highlighted. But then even now it's still barely seeable here. When you compare it to the white around it, you can barely see the green here. But what I've done is tweaked the color grading here in the post-process volume. This is originally like this, which is even less noticeable. So it's a kind of subtle difference here. But you can see it makes the oranges a little darker, and it makes the green right here. You can't even tell there's a green gem right here without this, but when you turn it on, you can see the tiny bit of suggestion of green right here, but it's still a bit too subtle. I can tweak this to the maximum too, and then it stands out a little bit better, but then things get a little bit too, the colors got a little bit off, so I liked it around 1.7. I feel like it's a nice balance between noticeable and yet not tweaking the rest of the colors too much. And if you actually, so there's so many different variables and factors going on right now that I don't understand, but if I eject the camera and go back to a perspective view, suddenly this highlight tweak has made a very profound difference to the way this looks. It looks almost, got a futuristic cell shading going on these cubes, where they're like weirdly metallic and Miami style heat going on. It looks kind of cool, actually. It looks like a skin that you would see in a real Lumines game, to have it be this trippy color scheme, but you still can't see the green in here very well. You can see it here when it's unmatched, but it barely stands out right here. So there's a lot of tweaks you can make, and you can see just changing this from 2 to 1. Now it's back to how it looked before. And then when you just tweak this, it changes the color temperature dramatically. And this is just one of hundreds of possible settings. So I don't know enough about color theory and lighting to make this look good, but this is where you can experiment and try to give it your own visual style, which can have a profound effect on the way it feels to play. I tried different settings too, but I have to preview them here in the orthographic projection so I can see what it's actually going to look like in gameplay. But you can try going the opposite direction and just pulling all the luminance out, but I think 1.7 was decent. I can maybe try tweaking the color balance here a little bit to get that makes it stand out a lot more without really affecting the other colors all that much. So maybe I'll do that. Let's see how that looks during gameplay. I think that looks pretty good. You can definitely see the green gems inside of the white matches now. So what I did to achieve this sort of pulsing, shining brightness was I made the material for the matched gems extremely bright, but then I changed the actual color to be extremely dark, and it seems to have this weird effect where it starts out really bright and then tries to correct it and like clamp it down during runtime. So that created a weird like pulsing effect when it first starts up. But if I reduce that darkness and actually make it brighter again, and then just decrease the strength of this back to like 2000 instead of 20,000, that may dampen that sudden pulse of light that appears when you match. So let's see what that looks like now. I think a bit of that is kind of nice to really give it some impact to the landing. See, now that pulsing is basically gone. So I might actually revert that change a little bit, but make it a little bit less dramatic, but still there. So if we sort of find a happy medium where it's a little darker and then a little bit brighter to account for that, to like, so I'll try 10,000. So we get a bit of that pulsing when it first lands, but not so much that it's upsetting to the viewer. So let's see what it looks like now if I place this. It's got a bit of a... Still not much of that effect that it initially had. So I'll go a little bit darker and a little bit brighter. That sounds strange to say, but this gives the effect of a real impact to landing the match with the special block. Maybe that's good, I don't know. You can really see this at the extreme if you pump this to something ridiculous like 100,000 and then make it darker here. It will really pop when you first land the match. But that's almost certainly overkill, I think, when it happens to such an extreme degree like that. It's very distracting. But something a little bit more obvious like this, I think, is nice. But not so much as that. That's a bit ridiculous. But I think it also, even after the initial pop, it seems to stand out better in the white if it's a bit more extreme like this. So I will lower this back to 20,000 and we'll see how that looks. And after this is enough tweaking the colors. We want to focus on getting the gameplay working first, so after this test I'll get back to actually configuring these to do what they're supposed to do instead of just lighting up, but also matching everything. Like right now this block should be lit up too, even though it's not part of a quad. It's touching the parts that are touching the gem, so that's what it should do. I think I'll leave the colors where they're at now. It's a bit wacky still, but maybe a little bit more interesting now. So one thing we have to fix here that's not working properly is the gems are fading out from the preview quads properly, but they don't seem to be coming into to this quad properly. Let's inspect that. If we come look at this, you can see that it's coming apart. It's dissolving properly, right? But over here, it's not dissolving into place properly. It's just going to suddenly appear in a couple of frames, like right here. It just appears all of a sudden. So let's try and diagnose why that's happening. When we set up our gem meshes, this should say initialize, not initial gem meshes. Give it a verb here, initialize. So we're creating a dynamic material instance with special block dissolve instance, and then putting that on the dissolve gem mesh. But both of these meshes, let's check their, first of all, let's check their collision and turn off the collision here. And let's also check their visibility. So they're both set to initially invisible. So now we need to again set it to visible. If this block is a special block when it spawns, then we need to make sure that the dissolve material is actually visible. So on the dissolve gem mesh, we need to set its visibility to true if this is of type special block. So that's why it's not dissolving in, because it's not visible during the animation. So we'll remedy that by setting it to be visible if it should be visible. And that should solve that issue. And then we can work on actually the gameplay logic to make them highlight their neighbors. Okay, it seems to be dissolving in now. We still have the problem where it's happening more rapidly than the block around it, because we're only seeing one small face of a block, but it still seems to be coming in properly. So that's good. So you can see it dissolves in over time. It's just a more rapid time. So we can slow that down on appearance. And we also want to reverse that from this one, just like we're reversing these materials. So what's missing from this block is what remains here, approximately, right? But that's not the case with this one. It's the same parts that are missing on both. So we need to reverse the material on this one, the texture rather. So again, we'll need to make one more material instance here where we have the preview and the block versions that just have the opposite texture. We just need to do the same thing here. Make another child of this. Special block dissolve instance block and special block dissolve instance preview. And the preview one will start like these ones, and then this one will have the opposite material here, the inverted one. So that it will appear properly. So now on the block, let's make sure we're using the right material now. Special block dissolve inst block. And let's see if that helps the effect. I think it does help. Again, ideally, it's just not going to even be noticeable. It's just coming in a little slower, and you know, it's missing the parts that are still here. But it's gonna be very hard to tell that during gameplay. But the point is, it's not that noticeable, which is good. So now we finally cleared that up. Let's get into making the gameplay work.